Spring 2021 series. Kathleen Liedke, I'm one of the parent advisors in the Central Region along with Susan Lewis. We welcome you. This is being brought to you in collaboration with NERCL, with Starbridge, and with Parent to Parent of New York State. So we are so thankful to have our presenter with us this morning, and Jennifer will introduce her and go over some of our housekeeping. Again, thank you and welcome.
So good morning, everyone. My name is Jennifer Sibley. I am a family peer advocate here at Northern Regional Center for Independent Living, or NERCL. We are very excited today to have Georgi with us from Starbridge. She's going to be presenting to you all on collaborative communication. This is a part 2 of a 3-part series on training for school-related issues. We've called it our Spring Training 2021 webinar series. This is a collaboration between Families Together in New York State parent partners, parent partners, sorry. The parent advisors, sorry. Starbridge, NERCL, and Parent to Parent of New York State. So with that in mind, we have a few housekeeping things to let you know about. We have a lot of folks here on our webinar this morning. So if you could please mute yourself so that we do not have a lot of background noise, that would be wonderful, because we all want to hear Kara's great presentation today. We are recording today's webinar, so there will be occasions where we are going to be turning the PowerPoint off so that we can have some interaction. If you don't want to appear on the recording, we would ask that you please shut off your video. Any questions that you have, we encourage you to type those into the chat box. We will be taking occasional breaks throughout the presentation to answer those questions. And like I said, today we are recording today's webinar, and we will make the recording and a copy of the PowerPoint, as well as some helpful follow-up handouts, available to you after today's presentation. There will be a survey posted in the chat box towards the end of today's presentation, and we would really appreciate your feedback. So if you could click on that link when it comes up, that would be wonderful. And now, without any further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Georgi for today's presentation on collaborative communication. Thanks, Kara.
Thanks, Jen, and welcome everyone. We are super lucky to have you each taking time out of your really busy lives and busy schedules to come and be with us for this series. When we were thinking about how do you go about talking about things for spring 2021 with all that's going on with education, and we thought about, first and foremost, the importance of how do we stay strong. And Tina's presentation gave us some great tips for that. And if you missed it, we'll have the recording available for you, so don't worry. But today we really wanted to talk about collaborative communication. And what does that look like? How do we do it when there's so many different ways of having to be connected right now, with just people being virtual still, some in-person things happening, and many questions and things that others have had. So I'm hoping today we can kind of dive into some of that. But first, what I'd like to do is tell you a little bit about Starbridge. So I work as the family education specialist for Central New York through Starbridge, which the agency itself is based in Rochester, but I'm the Central New York component of the Rochester hub. And so our agency works to partner with people of diverse abilities, their families, and others who support them, to really look at how do we achieve success in education, employment, and healthy living. We really believe that in working together, we can transform communities to include everyone. And for me, as I work each day, I really look at our tagline of for the hope and the how. How do we keep the hope strong? And how do we approach things differently? How do we give some new tools, some tips, some reminders? Because as I shared, we're all busy. So how do we help do that? And how do we do that together? And so I'm hoping today's presentation will give you some ideas, walk away with some tools for you, maybe a family you know, maybe even for yourself as you're navigating things for your own children. I encourage you also check out our website for other trainings, information, and some of the resources that I'll be sharing today are actually located in the website, and you can go and explore the other additional great resources we have around education there. And feel free to always reach out and give us a call and just say, hey, I was on Kira's workshop and she said this, can you connect to me? They'll be happy to do that for you. Each year, we touch more than 10,000 people, and a lot of our services are focused, as I shared, in that Rochester area. But some of the supports that I provide are around special ed navigation and providing workshops such as this one, and also phone support around advocacy and helping families as you're trying to sort out what could we do for our child, what would work for them, how do we best support them. And so here's my plan for our time together this morning. I want to just kind of take a moment, note where we're at, because it's important to sometimes just take that breath. I'm going to dive into a little bit of what is a proactive approach of how can we kind of strategize when we're communicating. I'm going to really dive in looking at the daily piece, and I'm going to help you hopefully take an opportunity to look at it through the lens of a student, looking at it from the lens of a parent, and also just looking at it from the lens of an education professional. And then really kind of take that step back and say, now that we know everybody has a lot and we've looked at some of what those lot pieces are, then talk about what are some communication details we can all work on. Then talk about some great steps and tips that you can walk through, and then leave you with some things to think on, and most importantly, hopefully some great handouts that will help you as you're going further. So thinking about school in general right now, I want you to just take a moment, take a deep breath. What happens for you when you hear the word school right now? Do you get kind of stressed? Do you feel some tightness? Do you get an upset feeling in your stomach? Do you're like, oh my gosh, Kara, I can't even tell you what I think about school right now? How are you feeling? And you'll see why that's so important, because there is a lot going on right now for schools. School looks different than it has before, and sometimes different can have a lot of different feelings associated with it. Some of them might be on the harder side, and for some, they might be excited just because school's starting to open back up again. But it's important that we realize and recognize how we feel just thinking about school in general as a big thing. Then it's important to take that step back and say, in that school, there are many families. And what I love about this quote is it says it's a little bit of crazy, a little bit of loud, and a whole lot of love. One of the most important things is the way families have stepped up during the pandemic to try to be working, teaching their children, falling into bigger roles than they've ever had to before, and juggle way more than ever before. And so why I put this in is I want you to think about how good families have shown up. And good doesn't mean it was perfect. Good doesn't mean you have a checkbox in every little spot. Good means you're here today. Every moment that we have with our kids, we're learning, we're growing. And while it has been hard and it has been challenging, I encourage families to think about the learning opportunities, just in general in life. When we play games with our kids, when we work with our kids, we learn a lot about them. And it's that knowledge that we bring when we are talking with the school about things that our children are struggling with. It's that knowledge we bring when we walk into a 504 meeting or an IEP meeting. Being a part of a child's life and being part of their family, that means you have some really important knowledge that you have that you can share and gift to others. I want to ask you though, what does the word collaborative mean to you? So if I say that word collaborative, how do you define the word collaborative? Go ahead and type it in the chat. I'm going to stop sharing for a moment. What do you think about the word collaborative? What pops into your mind? Working together as a team, right? That team word is important, right? Because it implies something. It means there's something going on. Better outcomes, absolutely, Darcy. It means hopefully if we're working together, we're being collaborative, things are changing and for the better. It means equally. It means that it's shared partnership, right? That it's not one person who's doing it all. It's all of us kind of sharing in the roles. If you're being collaborative, you need to be on the same page, right? You can't just kind of have it all over the place. Think of why is being on the same page so important? And especially if we're talking about education, why is it being on the same page so important when we talk about a child? Think of how it is for a child if we aren't all on the same page, right? It's stressful. It's stressful for us. It's stressful for them. So I encourage you, as you think about how do we be collaborative, think about that team piece. And remember, with a team, it means there's give and take. It means sometimes you might have to step back just to hear what that other team member is really saying. And we're going to talk a little bit about some of the tips of how to do that, because I know for myself, sometimes as a team player, I'm like, come on, guys, let's go. And I have all these ideas and I almost overwhelm my team because I'm constantly asking questions or I'm constantly giving information. And sometimes we just need the space for another team member to be able to step in and share a few pieces that they have that could make a big difference. So thinking about that as we go forward, and how does that word collaborative really play out in your day-to-day life? So then we get to the question of, okay, well, Carrie, you're talking about collaborative. How do we do it? One of the most important ways when we're trying to think through how do we do collaboration is being proactive. And proactive advocacy is the skill of really looking ahead to prepare for long-term success. Meaning every day hopefully isn't a crisis that you're having to respond to. Maybe you can look ahead and say, what's coming up? Is there some meeting that we need to prepare for in advance? Right now, because of so many things being up in the air, any family that I talk to right now, I said, let's really look at what is the need that that child right there has. How are we going to possibly go about meeting that need and have a couple of plans? Because as we all know, plans can change in the blink of an eye. And so if you're being proactive, you're really looking ahead of what are some of the barriers this child could face? What are some of the skills and assets that that child has that they can bring to help when they run into a difficult piece? Really, truly looking ahead, what can we do to set up a better plan? And recognizing that no matter how far ahead we look, we can't plan for everything. And that bumps and challenges are going to occur. But if we're working in collaboration and as part of a team, we're going to have people to help us get through this. And it's one of the reasons why we're collaborating in this workshop series. We want you to know there's resources out there right in your community right now that you can ask help from and say, hey, this is what's going on. Do you have some other ideas? Do you have some tips? And now let's think about diving in a little bit deeper and looking. So communication is made up of 4 parts. There's thinking, there's listening, there's speaking, and there's the nonverbal. So now I want us to zoom in and think about how it is for our kids right now. Think about their thinking, all their thinking right now. They're thinking of, well, is school really going to stay open if their school has opened up? If they're in virtual learning, they're having to think and keep track of all their assignments in a virtual world where there is no necessarily checks and balances all the time. They're thinking about, how do I learn in this different way where I'm using technology to teach me everything? They're thinking just about how are they going to stay safe? They're thinking about how much they miss their friends. They're thinking about what could be. Then think about the listening piece. And this is a piece that sometimes we forget with kids. We say, yeah, that kid's not listening or the kid isn't checked in, but kids listen and hear way more than we give them credit for. So think about all the information they're having to take in on a day-to-day basis right now. And especially for some of those students who are working virtually, think of how they're having to really listen through a computer and how the audio isn't always clear. Sometimes it breaks up or it doesn't work properly. How those things could get in the way of the student being able to engage in their classroom work, their classroom setting. Thinking of how sometimes as we're trying to listen, we have lots of questions that bubble up, and that can sometimes stop us from being able to really effectively listen. Then think of speaking. Speaking, you would say, is easy, right? Everybody does it. It's not always easy. For some children, being able to speak and talk and share, especially what it is they need help with, they don't necessarily know how to do that in a virtual setting. They're used to raising their hand and the teacher coming over and being able to problem solve with them. So as we think through how speaking works, I say, I need help. You're going to say, okay, what do you need help with? I might not be able to put those words together. And a lot of our students are struggling with that, even with being in person again, of How do I make it clear what I need if I'm wearing a mask in my classroom setting and my voice is kind of low? Then think of those nonverbal cues. Today, you see my head and a little bit of my shoulders. You don't know if I'm fidgeting off camera. You don't know if I'm feeling kind of tense and I'm clenching my fists. All those nonverbal things that let you know how am I feeling as a presenter that you would normally see if we were in person. Those nonverbal things that tell us a whole lot of information that lets us kind of see in. Now think through these 4 communication skills as a teacher, as an educator right now. All that they have to think of. It's now not just curriculum, it's technology. It's figuring out safety things. It's figuring out how do they make sure they're engaging with families. It's a lot of thinking. Then how are they giving space to really listen and hear? What are the opportunities to connect? Then again, thinking through their piece, how are we giving them space to talk and speak? And what happens if technology doesn't work? What happens if the Zoom meeting fails when we're trying to have a parent-teacher conference? What happens if that teacher, as they're talking, I miss a piece? How do I go back as a parent to catch that and say, hey, you were talking about, but I wasn't really sure? And then again, that nonverbal, all the things that we take for granted, the facial expressions, the body language. And now think through this as a parent. Every day we have to think about, what are we putting in our child's backpack? Because for some of our children, they have to bring everything with them back and forth every day. That's a lot to make sure we put together and helping them to remember that and helping to support our kids with that. We have to make choices about how are we going to support our children with their learning? What does that look like? What works for our family units? We have to do a whole lot of listening. And sometimes it's hard to slow down enough to really listen. And you're like, what's that, Karen? What do you mean? Like, we're listening, they talk, we acknowledge what they say. Really listening sometimes though is literally stopping, looking here and sending my emails and saying, I hear you. Really listening sometimes for our kids right now is stopping, looking here and looking over here at our kids. Or for some of our kids, like my oldest, it's looking up and filling them in and letting him know I'm hearing him, I'm understanding what's going on. And it's also helping to support him with his speaking. How am I making clear how I'm feeling? How am I making it clear what my expectations are? And again, what is my nonverbal saying when I'm racing around the house saying, okay, everybody, we're doing presentation today. We got to be quiet. Like, okay, make sure you're all settled there. All those little things as they watch me move, they can sense, okay, mom's feeling a little anxious. There's a presentation coming. Then they hear that part of me speaking saying, okay, make sure they can hear the change in my voice. All of those things are in communication. And so sometimes when we say, well, communication, we got this. Communication, yeah, we might have this, but sometimes we need to stop and look at the little pieces to try to help improve and work on that collaboration and work on things with our partners. And part of that is understanding our emotions and feelings. That's why I took that moment to say, what do you think of when you hear the word school? What are your own feelings? What are your emotions as you're working with others? Thinking through how some of us help to support others' families and other friends even right now. How are we feeling about that? I think Tina's presentation was super powerful in helping us to explore some of that, recognize that, and recognize too that we have to take care of ourselves if we're going to be helping others. Our emotions are going to affect the way we think and act. If we're feeling drained, we're going to respond in a different way. If we're feeling hopeful, we'll have a more positive outlook when we interact with others. Our emotions are a big piece. And so that, again, is that important piece with communication, being tuned into you. What's going on for you? How are you feeling? Because as we have those relationships and as we build those collaborations, how we act can either build those partnerships up and make them amazing, but for others, they can create barriers. Sometimes if I'm dumping too much or I'm asking too many questions, people might be like, well, why is she doing that? What's wrong? And so I have to help my partners understand where I'm coming at. Why am I asking the questions I'm asking? What I'm hoping to achieve. And most importantly, am I giving them space to share with me as well? Collaboration means back and forth, not just one person and others tagging along behind. And if we really want to be effective, we got to understand ourselves. Sometimes stopping before we speak, because there is a lot of feeling or emotion behind something. Sometimes it's labeling it and naming it. I'm feeling really overwhelmed right now. I'm not sure how to handle this, but I'm hoping this question will help us. It helps others to be able to partner with you. I know for myself, with one of my children, that's what I had to do with one of the school staff. And because I had so much going on up here in my mind and my heart as a mom, that I needed to take a moment and say, there's just so much in front of us right now. We have some big, hard decisions we need to make. And I'm hoping you can help. I understand if you can't. I know you've had a lot on your plate, but if you could possibly help us sort this out or help us identify a first step, that'd be really helpful. And one of the things that can sometimes help is knowing your communication style. So I have 4 images up here. One is a hammer. I want you to think of the hammer as people who like to get things done. They're efficient. They're like, boom, check box, done, off our plate. Let's get it off and get it done. A magnifying glass person is someone who likes all the details. You can ask the why questions or the have you thought about questions. So I encourage you to think about who might those magnifying glass people be, or are you one of them? For the binoculars, those are the people who are looking that far range. They like to look ahead, as far ahead as they can. And they like to see, well, what could be? Are you the binoculars person? Or maybe you're the teddy bear. You like to kind of check in on the people's feelings and how are they really doing and feeling emotionally, or, oh, we need to comfort this person for this reason. I want you to take a moment and think of which one are you? And when we do this normally, we would be in a room and I'd have you go to corners. And when we do this, very often people are like, it depends on the situation, right? So I want you to put yourself in a situation for school. Maybe you're having to work with the school for your child. Maybe you're supporting a family with their school situation. Which one of these would you take on in that moment? And I'm going to ask you to go ahead and type that in the chat. Let's see what we have. We got a hammer. I know Tina loves to get things done. Robin, you're a magnifying glass. Jen, you like to look long term and be those binoculars. Karen, you like being those binoculars too. And as you think about this, thinking of how you communicate and what your style is helps you to figure out your piece as you plug in for your collaboration. And as you think about how you are and which one you identify with, now I want you to think of what one is the hardest for you to work with. That you're like, oh, Kara, like if that person's on my team, they ruffle some feathers. Who ruffles your feathers a little bit? Maybe makes it uncomfortable. Maybe you feel like it interferes with your style. Tina, you're absolutely right. We all can be a little bit of each one, depending on the setting we're in, right? Or who we're talking about. If it's my kids, I'm a teddy bear person and I'm all in the details. But when I'm helping others, I tend to shift and I want to make sure we're getting things done. I want to see big, long term pictures. Jen, I love how you said hammers. They ruffle your feathers depending on how hard they hit. Absolutely. Wendy, those teddy bears, those feelings can sometimes get in the way. Christine, absolutely. It does vary. People can change roles. And sometimes people can even change roles in a meeting, right? They might be a detail person and all of a sudden somebody hit a nerve and now they're the teddy bear and they're like, wait, and they're talking about the emotions. As you think about this, I want you to think about that as you walk into meetings, as you prepare for CSE meetings, as you prepare to walk into just any meeting that you're ever in. Kind of look around the room. Take notice of the people. What do you see in them? What hat are they coming from? Are they a hammer? They just want to get things done? Are they a teddy bear? Are they binoculars or are they that magnifying glass? And why that's so important to kind of be aware and be in tune with is because it kind of changes how you approach things, right? How you would say things to people. And so it's important that you think through that and know that first and foremost about yourself, but also knowing that about others can help to improve your collaboration and communication. Because while these things might have moments where they kind of butt heads or have challenges, there's also times where you can leverage the strengths that they each bring, recognizing that it's not just one way to get things done. There's many, and there's an appreciation for each of the styles that these represent and that they bring. So thinking through, how does that impact you? How does it impact your team, and being aware of that? Then, as Tina shared in her presentation about the circle of influence, there's always things that you can control or change. We can change our attitude. Sometimes that's easier said than done. We can change our mood. We can change our reaction to the good and bad things that happen. And we can even change how we treat other people. I think of that of just the other day, there was a person on the team who I was working with for a student, and that person forgot something really big. And I was like, that was huge. Like, do you understand that? And instead of firing back an email, I was like, there could be tone in that. There could be a problem with that. And so let me wait and like chill my own reaction, my own attitude, my own mood about this, because maybe I need to step back and see the bigger picture. Why didn't that happen? And sometimes when we can take that pause or that step back, we can realize things that are going on that we can change, especially in a period of time where we feel like there's things we can't, because the reality is there's things we can't change. I can't change that other person, but I can change how I respond to them. I can't change the weather, even though I wish we could, because there's some days here in New York that it's just not the way we need it. I also can't change or control the things that happened in the past or how other people treat me. So really thinking through that, what can we change and what we can't change, and recognizing and giving that space. Again, just that awareness piece, because our attitude's everything. As we think through collaborating and working together, we're all tired. There's days where I'm just like, oh, it's hard to get up, right? There's a lot going on in the world. But if I can change my attitude, I can change big things that happen as I'm collaborating. I can change how I show up. I'll be honest with you, this morning I was feeling a little like sluggish, and I don't like feeling that way before a presentation. So to shift my attitude, I put music on. And music like somehow resets me and fires me up. Think of what can you do yourself that helps shift your attitude or change how you can approach things. Sometimes it's picking up a phone and calling a good friend. Sometimes it's just hearing, like this morning when we were all on right before the presentation started, the team was like, whoa, Kara, I love the bright colors in your presentation. And they were so supportive before we opened it up. But their support in those few moments they took to say positive words helps to build up that positive attitude, that way that we approach things. And attitude is huge. It can sometimes be the biggest barrier that gets in the way when we're communicating, right? We think somebody said something wrong. How do we shift that? I'm going to stop for a second and see, are there any questions in the chat?
There are a lot of questions, Kara, but there are a couple comments and I wanted to share those. So back when you were talking about the pieces of communication, someone typed into the chat that, there are some kids, especially, that have a hard time interpreting tone. So that's something to keep in mind, especially when you're working with kids with disabilities, is that, communication is definitely more than just the spoken word. It's all of those pieces put together.
Absolutely.
And then, so there's been a lot of great things in the chat when you've been talking about attitude. Christine says, I know a meeting, if I know a meeting is going to be contentious, I try to bring something like a new program that might help them to try to start on a good note. Tina says each of these styles brings a lot to the table. It's how we all collaborate together for the student. And then Christine also says, I have a parent who is aggressive and inappropriate, but not wrong. She pictures the CSE as a speed bump in the road. I convinced her that she would be scarier to the CSE if she was controlled and informed, and she did it.
Great advice, Christine. So true. Having the unexpected happen, right? It can really shift things. Totally agree. And I appreciate that because sometimes with how we come across or how we come out can really just shut things down and have people not willing to listen, not willing to hear. And so figuring out, and I think sometimes too, it's having that person that you can kind of rehearse or almost practice it with so they can give you tips like what Christine just shared, because as we're communicating, sometimes we're not aware of some of those subtle things that we're doing or saying that could come across a different way towards others, and having people point that out to us. And sometimes it's not even just pointing it out. Sometimes it's also hearing the other person say it back to us as we shared it. So that way they can kind of get the feel for how we communicate and what could be the breakdown. You all are amazing. So excited.
Hey, Kara, I also wanted to share, going back to the 4 parts of communication, that a lot of times those kids also have some issues picking up on the nonverbal cues. And so, those things are very important. Sometimes those skills have to be taught to kids very explicitly.
So true. And what I appreciate about that, Jen, is thinking through how the nonverbal piece plays in a virtual format too. Like, what if I decide I'm turning my camera off and you're not going to see me today, and we're going to go into breakout rooms and we're supposed to work together in pairs, but I'm going to leave my camera off and I'm going to stay muted and I'm not going to talk to you. For some of our kids, that has been problematic because they're like, well, why is that person not coming on? We're supposed to work as a pair. And even just understanding the mechanics of like posted assignments, right? And like, did you hit the button that says done to make it officially done? There's so many little things. And what I appreciated about that comment, though, is that teach piece. So often we are doing this. We're making assumptions, right? We're assuming that it's known. We're assuming that people just know. And we sometimes don't take the time to make sure to do the check-in. Was there anything else that you wanted to share, Jen?
That's it so far. Great conversation.
Absolutely. And when we think through the assumptions and we think through how we're going to collaborate, it's making sure that we don't assume that everybody has the same information. It's checking in to make sure that we're all on the same page. There's a family I was helping recently, and they have a teenage child. And that teenage child was struggling a lot with the virtual learning. Even though they're back in school, they're still using a lot on the computer. And the teachers were like, well, it's posted, so you should know what you have. And the child's like, but I don't. And it's because it's all electronic. And they're like, I'm lost because I have to go to different things and click in different spots. And I think it's something's done, but the reality is I didn't fully finish it. And so helping the teachers to understand, the kid genuinely was assuming he was done with his assignments. And we even had him walk us through and model, like, show us what you did. Because I think that's the other big piece. When you don't assume and you say, well, let me see this. Could you walk me through? How do you do that? And when kids can take the time to like show us how they're doing things, it removes the assumptions we're making about them, because we can see, yeah, they were following all the steps, but we didn't teach them that after they do these steps, they then have to go back here and push this up and then click done. Or they have to go and complete this so that way the whole thing is officially done. And so I encourage you, as you're finding barriers like that, use the words, can you show me? Because showing gives you that evidence. Showing gives you the concrete piece that you as a collaborator need to know. Same thing as we walk into these meetings. I've been encouraging families to take some notes of what did they notice about their children learning in a virtual environment? What were the strengths? What were the challenges? I encourage them to talk to their kids, because again, we make the assumption, well, they're too little, like they're not going to understand, they're not going to know. our kids know from a very young age sometimes and have the biggest, brightest ideas that can challenge some of the assumptions that we as adults are making. So I encourage you, really don't just assume that this is going to work. Check in, encourage people to show, encourage people to make it clear and say, what would this look like? What does this look like? Let's walk through the day in the life of this child and see from the time they wake up until the school day is over, what does that look like for them? What are they juggling? Thinking of what are the different pieces of communication that they're having to use? Are they having to email things? And if they're emailing, are they saying, I need help? Because that's what we tell our kids to do, right? If you need help, say, I need help. The child then makes the assumption, well, I asked for help, I'm going to get help. But very often, especially if it's being done through email, it's going to be emails back and forth. Well, what do you need help with? The child's like, I need help with math. Then the person's going to be, well, what do you need help with in math? And it's going to be back and forth and back and forth. And what happens with that back and forth sometimes is instead of it being a team of like, we're communicating, we're getting better and better, instead, everyone starts getting more frustrated. Why don't you understand what I'm telling you? This is what I need help with. Or why do they keep on not being clear if we're the teacher side, right? So helping to say, can you please show me? And when we tell our kids, ask for help, helping them to learn those skills, that teach piece of when you say you need help, what is it that you need help with? Make sure that it's clearer of, I need help with math. I need help with my computer. I need help working with my friend. Helping our kids to just expand that I need help sentence can really help with assumptions that get made. And tone, as we said it is not what you said, it is how you said it. And here's the hardest part right now. We don't have just tone of talking face to face anymore. We have tone in our text messages, our emails. We have tone in our classroom minds or class school dojo things that we're sending information back and forth. We have to watch the tone because it is simply the string of words that we put together really can be the barrier to somebody thinking we have a problem or we're expressing something with an attitude when the reality is we're not. We're just kind of saying like, hey, this is what we need help with. Watching that tone, watching how information is received, because it can really change things. And again, sometimes with tone, a tool that I've learned for me with tone is I try to rehearse it in my head first. It doesn't always work because sometimes it just comes out. But I also try to think of what is the person on the other side feeling or going through. If I know they're stressed on that side, I might give that space first and say, I know you have a lot going on right now, but I really need to know. Because when I say I really need to know, think of how they're reading it on their side when they're in the course of their busy day. Helping people to realize tone can make such a difference. And right now, I'm really encouraging people, if there's something big, pick up the phone and talk to the person instead. It can save you a lot of that back and forth, text message, emails, all of that. That's great that we can communicate with people that way. But sometimes there's tone red where there's not really tone at all. And it can hurt relationships. It's important too to allow space to save face. We all make mistakes. We all have days where sometimes we respond more quickly or harshly, or sometimes we just completely melt down. As a mom, there was a meeting that I was in and it was rough. I totally disagreed with what was happening for my child. And I just was beside myself and was just like, you know what, like clearly we don't have a plan. We just need to do something different. And so rather than completely falling apart or losing my cool because I knew I was almost there, I saved face. I stepped out of that meeting and I said, let me go home. Let me think about things. We'll come back together. It gave an opportunity for me to cool down and come back to them and say, you know what, like, I'm really sorry. I know the team is trying. I know I said it felt like the team wasn't doing anything, but here's how I'm feeling as a mom. My kid really needs help. And as a team, we need to do this together. But we also have to give opportunities where we give space, where we allow people to be human and recognize that there's emotions when it comes to kids. And the one thing, if you hold on to nothing else, is hold on to that child. And what I mean by that is when everything else is falling apart, I want you to go and look and say, what is one thing that that child needs for today and how can I make that happen? One thing. It doesn't have to be at all, because so often we feel like it does have to be at all. But that's where we have to set boundaries. How are we going to support that child? Where are we going to have the line between this is school time versus this is time for you to just be a child? What are the boundaries for ourselves as we're juggling work and responsibilities? What are the boundaries of us sending emails? Again, thinking through when we have all these ways we can reach the school. Are we sending emails at midnight? Are we sending emails at all hours of the day? Are we texting and messaging the teacher throughout the day when they're trying to teach a class, whether it be in person or virtual, and expecting a response right away? It's important we set those boundaries. And when I talk with some families, sometimes if they're like, well, they're not responding. And I said, okay, I want you to take a moment. I want you to step back. I want you to see, here's school. What do you think the teachers are doing during the day? And they're like, well, they're teaching. And I said, exactly. And I said, so I understand your child's remote right now and you really have a burning question because the child can't move forward with this assignment. But I can promise you, if you send an email and explain the situation, they'll get back to you as soon as they can, and they'll understand if something's running a little bit behind. Setting boundaries, it's just good practice. It's how you stay healthy. And so as we think about those boundaries, I want you to think about, how do you like to communicate with others? And how do they like to communicate with you? So think about that. Are you somebody who you rather talk to them on the phone? Do you love sending the emails because it gives you that space where you can kind of sit and think, well, let me change that word here and let me add in this detail there. And like, it gives you space to kind of brain dump. Are you the person who likes to text? Because it can be a quick, ooh, yes, I got this. Do you like using the school apps that they have, like School Dojo, Remind, and others? Do you prefer to communicate in person? Even if we have to be socially distanced, is that your thing? Like that works best for you? Or other ideas? Again, knowing how you like to communicate is important, but we also have to know how the other side wants to communicate back with us. We have to understand that if I'm calling and leaving a voicemail for Jen, and Jen is better if I send her a text, I have to know that about her, that I might want her to pick up the phone, but guess what? She's going to be texting me because that's what works for her. And we have to share that. And so I would understand sometimes that I need to text, and Jen would understand sometimes I need her to pick up the phone. But again, we can't make the assumption that we know that about each other just because we do it that way, right? Sometimes you need to have the outfront conversation of, you know what, I know your day's busy. For me, it works best if we could possibly do a phone call because, and help them to understand why you like that. For others, helping them understand what are the best ways to reach you. For example, today, I have left a voicemail for one of my own children for something. And when I left that voicemail, I said, you can text me or you can email me, but if you call, I am not free from this time to this time. I was clear in my communication, so they knew they had several different ways they could try because I knew they liked those ways. But then I said my preferred way, which is phone, but I just can't talk between this time. I didn't make assumptions, but I also set boundaries, helping each other to do that. And sometimes, again, we forget that. And sometimes too, as I'm working with families, I'll hear things like, the family's in a tough spot and communication's just broken down. It's the simplest way to say it. And sometimes parents are told, sorry, like you need to stop communicating with the teacher and go through the principal for a little bit. Schools will do that sometimes to buffer the teacher if we're inundating them too much, because the teacher's trying to figure out how do they respond to it all so you don't feel like you were left alone. But sometimes it gets to be too much when they're managing an entire classroom plus all of that they have to manage every day. And as a former teacher, I can tell you there is no day that passed that I wanted to not respond if a parent reached out. But sometimes that meant really long days and really long hours. And then I'm reaching out to families at times that aren't practical. So knowing that, figuring out how do you manage that. And then we get to this big piece of listening. So we communicate, we talk, but when we think about listening, we can speak 125 words per minute. That's a lot. I know I've been saying a lot of words to each of you right now. However, we can listen up to 400 words per minute. Think about what that looks like right now. Remember that example about me telling you about the child? I'm looking here and I'm listening to you, but I have my ear over here, half listening to my child. Am I being really strong for either of you? No, because I'm dividing myself. I'm not really truly sitting and hearing what you're saying, being in that space. And we have to listen to be able to understand the information that's being shared. Here are some of the little things behind the information. As Jen shared, some of our children with disabilities don't know how to pick up on that stuff. They need it direct and clear and specific. And so we have to figure out what is the real intent. And for some of our kids, they struggle with that. They don't always understand. And again, that's something that has to be taught. We can't assume and take it for granted. Well, they can hear, so they can listen. No, listening is a skill, and it takes work and it takes time. And for us as adults, sometimes it takes time to unlearn some of the behaviors that we do of half listening in 50 places and not really fully being there for any single one of those conversations. And thinking too, most people don't listen with the intent to understand. They listen with the intent to reply. So think about when I asked Jen about, are there any questions in the chat? And I have that going on and I'm like, okay, well, if Jen doesn't come back, then I might say this. Was I really present for Jen? Was I really ready to understand the questions that one of you might have put in the chat? No. And so really thinking through, how do I take that space and be okay when it's like this? A quiet pause. A quiet pause isn't a bad thing, but we so often are like, oh, well, like people could be tense, or like maybe they're mad, or maybe like they misunderstood me. No, sometimes that pause just means we're trying to understand. We're trying to process that information. Every space does not need to be taken up with vocal words. Sometimes space needs to be taken up with just listening to process and understand what that person was sharing, the whole pieces of it. And part of doing that is after we take that pause or we respond, we need to ask clarifying questions. Let me see if I understood you correctly. Is that correct? Help me understand. And notice, remember, it's like that thing that I told you where show me what you were doing. Help me understand. When we help each other do that, it creates a space to make sure that we're not making assumptions, to make sure that there is a common understanding, that we are working collaboratively as a team. And most importantly, some of you shared it in the chat, we're on the same page. If I just assume what you said and I've gone with it and I'm like, okay, this is the direction we're going, I might be on a completely different page or in a completely different chapter, is what I say sometimes when I'm working with families, right? It's like, it's not a different page, Kara. It's a different book sometimes, right? But if you ask those desired outcome questions of, is this correct? Help me understand. You're double checking. And most importantly, you're helping the other person feel validated that they were really fully heard correctly. But as we think about this and we think about doing it with adults, we also need to do it with the kids. Asking our kids these questions, helping to tease that out with them is big. Also acknowledging how they might be feeling. I know right now there was one thing that I was working with our school's nurse's office, because there's just all the craziness with navigating allergy season during COVID. And it's acknowledging up front, yes, I'm that mom who has that additional crazy question to ask because we're jumping through the hoops. And I know you're going through a lot, but I appreciate you being patient as I try to figure this out on my side. Acknowledging how they might be feeling, acknowledging how I'm feeling, and giving that space. It makes a big difference right now, now more than ever. When I'm talking with some of the families right now, what they tell me is they're like, it's just heavy. And I said, yeah, it is just heavy some days. But together we're going to get through it and be realistic. Be gentle with yourself. Be gentle with your kids. and know that in those everyday moments of being a parent, whether it's having dinner together and talking, or maybe it's playing a game, our kids are learning, our kids are growing. Our kids learn all the time. Learning doesn't just happen in school, it happens everywhere. School is just kind of a dedicated space for that. So helping our kids to understand that and understand those feelings, helping us to understand that too as parents. And this is a biggie because I love to have all the answers, but it's okay to not know. It is truly okay to say, you know what, I don't know right now. Let me look into that information and get back to you. The biggest piece with this, though, is when the answer comes back, even if it's not what you want to hear or what they want to hear, it needs to be the correct information. You got to get answers. You need it to be clear. Very often right now, another thing that I was working with a family on is their child was just overwhelmed with all the school that was going on. And it was an older student. And I said, you know what? I said, is it possible for me to maybe talk with them with you on the phone? And I said, sort some things out. And as I talked and listened to that child share with me, they're like, Kara, it's just a blur. And I said, I get it. And they're like, I'm to the point I don't even know what day it is. They're like, it's just Blur's Day. And I have shared Blur's Day with so many people because I'm like, that is perfect. It is Blur's Day. And I'm like, you don't really know like what is supposed to be here or what's supposed to be there. And she's like, I just need answers. I just need to know. And she's like, what am I at the end of the day expected to do? Because right now it's just a blur. And I said, okay, well, when we find out what is on that to-do list, are you okay with having to accomplish it all? Because it might be more than you think. And she said, I guess. And I said, well, how about this? When we get the correct information of all you need to do, let's meet. Let's talk about how do we break it down to make it so you can feel like you can do it. She loved it. She's like, yes, that works. She's like, that makes sense. And she's like, thank you for really hearing me. And so I want you to think about that. The kids right now who are overwhelmed, they don't want you to say, you've got like so much catching up to do, you're so behind. But they do want to know what it is they have to do, because even though you might think they've blown it off, or people are making those assumptions that they've blown it off, our kids are just juggling a lot and trying to figure out life, trying to figure out being who they are, and how do they get through all the work that's being expected. And how do we break it down in a way that works for them, that's approachable and manageable for the team. Remember the collaboration piece, the teacher's going to share what needs to be done. Our kiddos have to come into the space and be ready to do what they need to do. And then most importantly, after that happens, the family needs to figure out what's their role in it. And if there's other outside providers, what are their roles in this? How do we together help work towards the same goal on the same page for this child to end the school year in a strong way? And thinking of how we can't solve problems by using the same kind of thinking that we used when we created the whole thing to begin with. What are you going to do if you don't agree? Because sometimes you don't. We're human, right? It's okay to not agree. We don't all have to say yes. So what could happen? What are the actions? What do you do? Thinking of what are alternatives, and alternatives can be hard. Sometimes I'm like, I don't want to think about alternatives. I know this is best, but here's what the law says. It's what's appropriate. And that's a hard word shift for families. So I'm telling you as a mom, I want the best for both my children, but I need to realize that there are things that of what is appropriate and how do we get there and what are alternatives? And most importantly, how am I keeping the focus on the child? Again, right now, I know it's hard sometimes to get the services our kids need because it's just a different world right now. And so what I always point families to, what is the need that your child has? Like describe it in detail. Help me understand, what does it look like for your child? What are the barriers? What does it look like on a day-to-day for you? Bring it back to the kids, because then that's where the heart of all this is. It's the heart for those of us that work with the families. It's the heart of those of us who have these children that just need support. It's our kids. It's figuring out how do we meet their needs. And if we focus there and don't tie it to a specific service or a specific person or a specific anything, but say, how do we build out alternatives of meeting that need for this child? And recognizing sometimes the alternatives, while they might be scary because they're different or they're kind of unknown to us, might actually be the things that pushes these clouds out of the sky and makes it blue skies and wonderful for our kids. So now let's think through, we've talked a lot about the kids. And so one of the resources that you're going to get after today's presentation is a sheet about advocacy steps and how we put all this together and kind of put it into action. And so I'm going to break down the steps for you of thinking of how do we take this listening? How do we take this space of kind of removing assumptions? How do we think about our tone? How do we put all this together in action? First, identify the current problem. Notice the key word from this, current problem. Don't live in the past. What is right now the challenge that you're facing? Get complete information. Look at the concern from another person's point of view. Again, this is one of those things for me personally. It can be hard for me to sometimes see it from their view because I think my view is right because I'm mom, right? So sometimes I'm like, okay, we're going to play a game. I'm going to tell you about this child, and I want you to tell me, what would you advise? What do you think is going on for this child? And I would give them a scenario about this make-believe child that is just like what they shared with me about theirs. And then I would say, so what would you maybe consider for that child? And sometimes that can remove you enough that you can get that idea and that thinking going. Thinking through too, what are the barriers that are being faced? Like what's stopping us from addressing this problem and kind of removing it off the grid? What are the barriers that that child's facing? What are the barriers that parents facing? What are the barriers the teachers are facing? That's kind of a unique take, right? Because sometimes we're just like, well, it's the school's job and this is what they're supposed to do. Well, something's getting in the way. So let's try to identify what that might be so we can look and adjust this problem and find a way to hopefully help resolve it. Making contacts. This is huge. We cannot stress enough how important it is to do this in partnership and collaboration with people. Raising kids is hard work. It is not meant to be done on a little island where you have to figure it out all by yourself. Raising kids is a collaborative effort. It takes your family, your friends, your community, all of us coming together to help raise them and help work through these things. So talk to other parents, hear from them what's going on. Realize you're not alone. So many parents feel just like you at times. Having that space, and I think that's one of the beautiful things about the parent to parent. You can talk to other parents who truly get it and can understand and support. Love it. I think it's important when we have that peer support, those people who walked in our shoes and can say, I've lived it, don't worry, you'll get to the other side. Sometimes it's hard. And what I tell all families is it's a journey. It's not supposed to be this one road and it's the only way we go. It's a journey that you're on. It's going to have hills, it's going to have valleys, it's going to have twists and turns. It may unexpectedly divert and you have to just kind of go with it to address what's happening. That's where you can talk to an advocate or an attorney if it's necessary, or even the New York State Education Department Quality Assurance Representative and say, hey, this is going on. What can I do? What are my resources? Reach out, make contacts, because those contacts can help you explore options. And here's the deal. Sometimes my option that I like is option one because it's the one that I put on this post. But I have to recognize my partners might have other options. And while option one might be mine that I throw on the table, option three might be the most appropriate. And I have to look at, well, why is number three appropriate? Notice the arrow. It's going in the same direction as mine. Just because it's not my words, my thoughts, doesn't mean it's a bad thing, right? So being open to options, especially right now while everything is so unknown and there's so much being figured out. And then most importantly, take action, make a plan, and recognize in that plan that you have an eraser, you have a highlighter, you have lots of things you can do in that plan. But write an outline. What do you want to cover? Clearly define what you want and the why behind it. Remember, I said that show me, help me understand. The why needs to be there because sometimes you'll be asked, well, why do you think this is a problem? You got to be ready with that information. List your priorities and orders of what you're willing to negotiate on and what you aren't. What is your bottom line? And again, I want to give you so many resources. So here is another beautiful one that you are going to get. It's a link. You can download it off of our website. It's very pretty, just like my presentation. It has a whole little toolkit for you to talk about preparing for a meeting. And my favorite piece of this tool, it's not just you as the parent preparing for this meeting. It involves you talking with the children and hearing from them, even the little guys. They have some things they can share. Sometimes it could be kind of off the wall or maybe a little bit like, I want a water slide in my school. Well, that's great. Many children would love a water slide in their school too. But why do you want the water slide? And when you ask them, sometimes they can give us information to help us understand what could that water slide provide for them, that in their world, that's what they're thinking. But in our adult world, we can actually put something into play that would make that need be addressed. Don't get sidetracked. It's very easy to do. Write yourself a note to look at. Does this topic lead towards my child's success? Having that tool and that note reminds you, think of the child, keep them front and center. Some families bring a binder with all their information and there's a picture of their child on it. Some people bring a piece of art or a work sample that their child did that keeps it front and center. Somehow find a way to keep it focused on your child. So if you start feeling like you're going to go on the sidetrack, you bring yourself back. And recognizing too that sometimes in those meetings, you're going to be like, I'm just not in a space to make a decision. You can ask to table the meeting and come back at another point. It holds things in place for the time. It sometimes holds up other things that you might have in the works, but sometimes you need to do that so you don't get sidetracked and you can stay focused. What helps our kids get success? And sometimes we're going to be real. Agreement can't be reached. Have that noted in the meeting. It can be a part of the notes. And take time to process what is your next step and know your due process rights. Explore those, better understand those so you know what your rights are as a parent. Because sometimes when an agreement can't be reached, we might be stuck in the past. And you can't change that and they can't either. And so focusing on the future, focusing on the present and the future is vital and key for our kids. It's where we need to be. And when we talk with families, I say 90% of our time has to be talking about things and making them better. Only 10%, a small portion, can be talking about the past. That's because I need to know that because that's what got you to where you are. But if I stay there and we keep on hashing it over and over and over again, I'm not going to be able to help you focus on what's right now, what's to come. And we want to put our energy there so we can have a big difference happen. And sometimes I'll bring this slide up and show it to families because sometimes they're like, well, don't you understand the past is important? I said, I agree. The past is important. I got to understand where you came from to how you got to where you are today. But if I spend all my time listening to that, then I can't give you my time to help think of what do we do differently? How can we improve things? How can we make things better? And as I share and thinking through that with families, I also share with them how important it is to sometimes take a pause. Because sometimes when they call, there's a lot going on. It's just life, like, right? And as families are navigating things and having challenges, they want instant answers, instant resolutions. And I said, sometimes we just need to take a pause and be like, whoa, let's assess where we're at. Let's assess how was your child's day in school today? And we talk about that and we try to come back to the present because sometimes we want to fire off those emails, those text messages, or have somebody jump in. And sometimes that doesn't need to happen. Sometimes we just need to take a pause and say, okay, where are we at? Because that pause can help really improve things for us. Taking a pause isn't a bad thing. And sometimes that pause is just giving those emotions and everything some space and then going to bed and thinking about it. I also tell families as they think through things and want to put things to paper, pause on that. Pause before you automatically hit that email. Remember, tone can be in that. There's times, trust me, I am guilty of it too as a mom. I have typed up my email, I'm like, this is the best email ever. And then I hit the send. And guess what? When I hit the word send, I just sent off an email that had tons of probably tone in it, tons of stuff that when I'm calmer and in a different space, I probably wouldn't have put in an email, but I can't take that email back. So I need to make sure that I take that pause before I hit that send. Also, I need to think before I speak. I need to think about, is what I'm sharing true, like to the best of my knowledge? Is that helpful for my child? What's it going to result in? Because if it's just me as mom, yes, I'm mom and yes, I'm important, but the focus isn't about Kara. The focus is about my kiddo. Is it something inspiring to help the team, to contribute to the team? And is it something that's necessary that will help my child? And K, is it something that's kind? Do I somewhere in there acknowledge all the work that that partner is doing? Even if I'm frustrated, do I somewhere in there just acknowledge, you're making a difference in the life of my child? Every adult pours something different and something special into our child with the interactions they have. Where am I giving that space and acknowledging it? Where am I being a connector? Where am I helping us come together, not drive us apart, not put us on different pages? Where am I taking time to say, well, help me understand? Where am I saying, show me? Where am I saying, how do we improve things together as a team? And most importantly, am I really willing to stop with all my answers I want to give and take time to listen? Take time to give it space. Take time to be there, because in those spaces are where the gems are. Amidst all that hard, when we can take some time to really listen, really hear, really acknowledge what's going on, we're going to find some gems. And those gems are some of the brightest ones that lead to the greatest possibilities for our kids. But we sometimes have a while to get there. We might have to move a few stones. We might have to shuffle a few things around. We might have to think outside the box. And for some, we also might have to just remind them of what's inside the box. Because we've had to do so much out of the box thinking, they've forgot some of the basic things that we can do for children that can make a huge difference. And so making sure we give that space. And I'm going to pause there for a moment and see if there's any questions or comments before we get ready to shift into some final tools and resources.
Hi, Kara, it's Tina. There are a lot of questions, a lot of great conversation. I'm turning my camera on, so I'm going to kind of go over some. Everybody's just been fabulous on here with firing questions and comments back and forth in the chat box, so it's awesome. I'm just trying to get my chat box up here because it doesn't want to work for me now. Okay. So I want to get to where I was because there's so many. So let me start off with, there's comments, there's questions. It's a little bit of everything that you have going on here, but you've got some great things happening here. So the first thing is back to the eye contact. There's some people that were making comments about eye contact as being difficult for some kids. So I wanted to make sure that that was mentioned because that was a huge thing. And then we were talking, and I had it marked here. I like the voices and emails because we were talking about how to communicate. So I like voice and emails, voice to discuss concerns, email to document decisions as needed. I will typically follow up with a verbal discussion with an email for documenting purposes. That is so important that you can have a conversation about something in an email, but if you've got to document something, that's a huge thing. Email is phenomenal for that. And then you had, and I'm not sure if you're seeing the comments either, sometimes it's hard to tell from tone in an email or a text. That's sometimes a very difficult thing. In an email, you can't always tell the tone. I struggle with that as well. So I don't know how you feel about that.
Yeah, I think especially in emails, tone can be hard. And I think, again, that's why we can't just communicate one way. It's why we need to think about, communicating by phone or in person or finding ways to meet on Zoom. And the eye contact thing is huge, or even just being on camera is huge for some of our kids, right? Because they don't want to see themselves. And here's again, the piece that didn't get really taught is that there's this option. If you hover over your box and you go to the 3 dots, you can hide your self view, meaning your camera's still on. I, as the teacher, can
Hey,
see
Kristen,
you. Yeah, Jill.
before I forget, although
Okay. Somebody was talking, so I wasn't sure, Kara. I apologize about that. I was like, wait a second.
No
Okay.
worries.
Okay, so I'm trying to make sure I'm like looking at some of these. This is a topic that I've seen running through here, is that we all have a start time in the morning and an end time. And how do you explain to the parents that after a certain time your day is done? And it goes back to my presentation of making sure that you take care of yourself. And that's going to be very different for many other people, but that's a hard thing for some people to realize, and for parents to realize that we are parents too, right? And we have a start time and an end time. So that's a huge thing of, you know, calling and emailing. We've got to know how to tell that to parents politely.
Right. And one of the things that I encourage families to do and teachers to do is let them know, like, these are my hours that I traditionally work, or say, I work non-traditional hours. And so please just leave a message. And as soon as I'm able, I will respond. And just making sure that you do follow up with that and letting them know, like, if you're in a busy season and it's going to take maybe a day or two to respond, being real and saying that, like, I will respond within a day or two. So that way they don't think they fell off your radar, and that it's not something that you are actually going to go back to. And I love, oh my goodness, this chat is fired up with all the great thoughts that you all have.
You have so much in here. It's unbelievable. You have comments about student attending IEP meetings. We all think that's awesome. They should be, and letting their voices be heard, because they're going to be adults someday, and we want their voices to be heard. I have a 35-year-old, like I said, and that's important. I want him to voice what he wants in life. It's not my life, it's his. There's just so much in here that's good. We made comments about state ed quality assurance, that people need to learn how to use that. That's very important. It's there to help, as well as Starbridge and NERCL and parent to parent. There was one that was a little sad to me, I have to say, that, you know, you have sometimes employers that limit you when you're trying to help families.
Right.
Especially if you've been working in a system for a long time and you're really trying to help families, but yet you're limited to what you can do, and they make it a little bit more difficult. So that was a little sad. And I know I commented back, you know, in my 28 plus years, you find ways to kind of work around that to the best that you can, so that you're not ruffling feathers with your employer.
Absolutely. And I think too, helping them to understand what it's like on the family side, reminding them of the real life that families have right now of juggling work and school. And I think too, I'm seeing in the chat some comments about like just reaching out, the kids even, of being able to ask for help. And it is really, really hard. And how some of you are like, whoa, like, where did these resources come from? Like, I've been in the field forever. And like, suddenly now there's resources. How long have they been here? And that is a question we get all the time, right, Tina, of like, when did this suddenly come in? And the reality is a lot of these resources are there, but they're kind of like those hidden gems, right? And so it's important for us to keep doing information trainings like this and sharing and giving you more and more information for your toolbox. And it's, again, why we can't do this on islands, whether we're a family member, a provider, a community member. It's why we have to have people like all of you on these calls to hear this information, hear about the resources, have people like Jen dropping it in the chat, so that way you have that automatic link that you have access to. And
yeah, you just have a lot here. I mean, I don't know if you want to go through a ton of them now, or if you want to continue, but you have a lot on every point that you've been making, which is fabulous. And I think the more that we can put in the chat boxes about resources, or send an actual email later on with more links and information, we definitely can do that, Kara. So I can start to get some stuff together, as well as Jen behind the scenes for people, and we can send out an email if you're okay with that.
Yeah, I think that'd be a great idea to pull some of this, because all of you are dropping amazing thoughts and ideas in the chat. And while Tina, Jen, and I are your presenters, we learn in these sessions just as much as all of you do. We learn what's really going on, like what you're facing, what you need support with. And it's important that we're able to be there to kind of map out what are the resources across our state for families. How do we build strong families and strong communities to support them? Thank you so much, Tina. And we will continue on, but if there are other questions, thoughts, please keep typing in the box, because I'm going to share a few more ideas and gems with you, and then we will just open it wide up for questions, because I love seeing all of you typing in the chat, sharing things, giving ideas, because here's the deal. It is hard right now. It is hard for every single individual in our communities. And I think acknowledging that, giving that space, and saying, we've almost made it through the school year. Like I said, let's find a way to end the year strong, even if we can say the way that we ended this year strong is we survived it as a family. We got through it. It might not have been pretty. It could have had lots of roughness, right? But we got through it. So thinking through, how do we celebrate that? And one of the things that I work with families is something called the Protective Factors Framework. And it is research-based, 5 things that families need in order to be strong. And in the state of Michigan, they created this tool that helps families to remember what these 5 protective factors are. And I found this as a parent, and I was like, oh my gosh, I love this. And this has now become my lifeline when I'm struggling with something for my own children. And so what those 5 things are that you need to be strong as a family is the social emotional competence of children, the knowledge of parenting and child development, social connections that are positive and strong, parental resilience, and concrete support in times of need. So thinking about how does that play out with this hand, and like, why is there a hand? It's so that way you can remember them on your fingers. So first thing, giving a thumbs up. Think about how we do that with our kids. So if you remember nothing else about your thumb, think of that's the kid one. That's our kids' social emotional competence. That is them being able to communicate how they're feeling, what's going on. Like I said, if nothing else, this is your kid one. Next, your pointer finger. That is knowledge of parenting and child development. And remember how you want people to say, you're number one. Like, how good does that feel, right? Like, I'm number one. We are our child's first teacher. That does not mean we have all the answers. As a parent of 2 kids, I can tell you they need completely different rule books and playbooks and resources. But that's why I go to trainings. That's why I have to reach out to others, so that way I can build up my school tool belt of ideas. And sometimes it's reaching into the school saying, help me understand what this is that you're teaching, because it makes no sense to me, because I was not taught that way. But I'm their first teacher, and reminding parents of that. Everything you do important to your child, that's big. You're number one. We need to hear that sometimes, especially when we're feeling like things are hard. Next one, don't hold them up alone. Very bad. Keep them together, keep them tight. That's your positive social connections. And thinking of, if you have them tight like this, it's those strong relationships, those people you can check in and say, am I hearing this right? Am I assuming this right? What do you think about this? Right now, and during COVID, we've had to be like this and spread apart, but that doesn't mean we can't pick up the phone. It doesn't mean we can't socially distance, have a play date. There's ways that we can keep our social connections strong. And why I say positive is because we all know there's some of our social connections that don't always help us, that sometimes take our little problem we're sharing to get their opinion on, and they blow it into a mountain. So your connections need to be ones that are positive, that help you tease that out, that give you that space. Next one, that's your ring finger. That is your resilience. And for me, when I was thinking of what does resilience mean, it means I thought it was I had to be super mom. Something challenging came, boom, I solved it, problem resolved, super mom. No, my parental resilience, better understanding it now, means going through probably some of the most hardest, gut-wrenching, heart-wrenching moments with my children and coming out on the other side, strengthened and transformed as a result of those experiences. And trust me, when I'm in them, I don't want to hear how it's strengthening me or transforming me or putting me in a better place as a parent. I want to be like, this is really hard. But when I hold that finger, it reminds me, I got to stick with it. And again, where's my focus? My focus is on my child. And if I can keep it there, I can keep that commitment. Last one is your pinky. That is your concrete support in times of need. Asking for help is hard, whether we're a kid, an adult, anything. So thinking about the importance of, if we do ask for help, on the other side, we need concrete support, meaning it shows up and that it's actually there. And so using this tool to think through that. And as I got to better understand the protective factors and understand what each of these meant, I was like, I need to adapt this for schools, right? Because you're like, Kara, we're talking about schools. Where's that? Where did you go? Here you go. If we were in person, we would actually build a string as a tool that you could use for your meetings. So this is something you can totally do if you would like. But what I do is I encourage participants to tie a string to the first bead really, really tight. Because again, our focus is the child. And then put people in a space where they can really just think about that one child. And if you're a parent of multiples, I say pick one and start there. Then I have them think through a bead that would represent, what does that child need to be socially and emotionally ready to learn? Notice I said ready to learn. If I'm a child with anxiety, I'm a child who has behavioral challenges, or I'm a child that just struggles to communicate, I might not be ready to learn, because maybe if I can't communicate and tell you I have some things going on, or I don't have what I need and I can't tell you that, I'm not ready to learn. I'm stuck in my brain thinking about that. And so what would that child need so they could be ready to learn? I encourage families, think through those alternatives. Pick a bead and just slide it on the string. Then I tell them, think of, what knowledge does that child need so that they can participate? Pick a bead, put that on. Then I'm like, who can that child learn and grow with? Who are their friends, their peer network? Who are the staff that they can learn and grow with? Who are the staff that really get them? Like that tight relationship, slide a bead on. Think of what tools does that child have to help them if they encounter a problem so they can be resilient. And recognizing those tools need to be taught. Our kids don't automatically know how to solve their problems. Picking a bead, sliding that down. Lastly, what support or supports does that child need so they can be an active participant in their learning? What do they need? What will help them to achieve that? Picking a bead and putting it on. And then tying off the other end of the string with the hopes and dreams for that child. And as I've done this in multiple trainings, both in person and virtually, I've had parents tear up and say, Kara, that bead didn't exist. That bead's like the white bead because it wasn't there. And I'm like, okay, let's talk about that. What could be there? Because that's where the opportunities are. And I encourage you, as you think through this, how do you kind of walk through this with families? How do you walk through this and say, what can we put there to help us as a team have a tight bond from the child to their hopes and dreams? And it's why you slide beads 2 through 6 down, because they move and they shift, right? As our kids grow, as they shift, just like their IEP grows and shifts with them, and should always reflect where are they currently at in their present levels of performance. How are they doing? What are the things that we have in place for them? Same thing with their 504. Really review it, because our kids are little people that are changing and growing over time. And what worked one year does not necessarily work the next, or even partway through the year. It sometimes has to change. So what I encourage families to do is say, okay, what are we going to do? And again, it's that word that you've heard me say numerous times. It's taking that pause. It's taking that break to really break things down. Bring the focus back to the child. What I encourage you to do as we end this school year, take a pause, whether it be today or sometime this week, and say, how many more days do you have left of your school year? Then in that pause, say, what does my child really have to accomplish during this time? What's the end goal? Because if the end goal is we're going to complete everything, I'm sorry, but the word everything is vague. We don't know what that really means. What does that really look like? What does that commitment from the child look like, and the family and the teachers and the team. Recognizing what that is, then setting a plan. How are you going to get there? What are you going to do? Because if we stay in this, oh my gosh, it's heavy, it's hard, and we're going to just keep going, no, have a goal. Because as this school year ends, it needs to not just end, it needs a celebration. It was a hard, crazy year. Every year can be a hard, crazy year. And at the end of every year, there should be a pause and a break to celebrate what the child did, what you as a family did, what the school did, what your team did, how you showed up. Because we all know there's days people aren't able to show up the best they want. I'm guilty of that myself. But when I take the time to take the pause and say, but what was I able to do? I realized there were successes that could be celebrated and celebrated in a big way. But most importantly, celebrated as a team and recognizing that value and that importance. And as Henry Ford says, coming together is a beginning, keeping together is progress, working together is success. We together can do this. It's going to be through asking questions, just like I'm going to open us up for that today. It's reaching out to the resources. It's knowing that we can do this and we can do this together. And the reason why is why I go back to my tagline for our agency all the time. We're here for the hope and we're here for the how. And we might not have all the answers, but together we will figure it out as a team. And I just want to thank each and every one of you for being on today. There is a survey that Jen is going to drop in the chat if you wouldn't mind taking some time to fill that out. We're grant funded, which is what enables us to be able to do these trainings and enables me to be able to do this for communities. Please, please, please take a few minutes and answer the questions and give your honest feedback. I want to hear from you. What worked? What didn't? What were your thoughts? How was the chat? I want to hear all that good stuff. And so I'm going to stop sharing and open it up and hear about wonderful things that you have put in the chat.
You've got a lot. I've been trying to type to different people, so I'm sorry. There's just so much in here. It's just great information, and I need to pop it out over to the side so I can actually see. I think both Jen and I have been typing to people a lot of information, so forgive me. I'm just trying to look at all of the stuff that's here because that's a lot.
And I see a lot of you were excited about that one slide with the hand and the protective factors framework. There are so many great resources. We can add that to the resource sheet that we'll create as an additional handout where you can learn about each of them. There are tools, other tools parents created for parents, all about protective factors. And it's actually something when I'm not wearing my Starbridge hat, as a parent leader, I do the work nationally to spread this far and wide because I've seen the impact of it, not just in day-to-day parenting, but the difference it really could make for schools. And it is my dream that we can make that happen.
Well, I wish I could be sitting there here telling you the questions that are in here, but my scroll thing is not, it won't let me scroll down. So I'm not sure why. I'm seeing comments in there going in, but it won't let me scroll down. So I think, Jen, I'm going to need your help.
Sure, yeah. So let's see. So so we had someone say something about teachers don't always allow students to turn their video off. And I made the point in the comment section or the chat box that if you have a student who has an IEP or a 504 plan and that seeing themselves or seeing others on a screen is difficult for them, you can always request that as an accommodation on their IEP or 504. It is something that, you know, a lot of teachers use that as a way to ensure that students are participating in their class, which is a great way to make sure that you're not getting a blank screen and the kids just turning on their Zoom and walking away. But there are other ways to ensure that students are participating. lots of great conversations in the chat as well about just sharing some resources. So, you know, if the CSE isn't responding, put it in writing so that you have your documentation and you've got your paper trail.
And I saw in the chat too, Jen, there's a couple mentions of just districts where things have broken down, like where it's just a mess.
Yep.
And what I'm going to encourage you to do, reach out, let us come in and help support you, help support the families. Because some of the times when communication breaks down like that, I start off with just asking a parent to sign a release, just so you know what our process is. The parent would sign a release. It does not enable me to make decisions on their behalf or for their child. It simply allows me to gather information. And when I call in, I'm typically like, this is a family I just started working with. I hear that there's some challenges. Can you fill me in? Like, I don't give them what I know. I gather information because I want to hear from them, their perspective. Again, remember, I want to make assumptions that maybe there's something that's missing. And so I'm going to kind of look in and hear some of that information and find out, why is communication broken down? What's going on? Like, where are the hard feelings? Like, and why are there hard feelings? And how do we start trying to fix some of that and mend some of that? Relationships are messy and hard, period. Start putting it into the professional realm or start putting it into the school realm. It adds a whole nother element to it. And so I encourage you, reach out. Don't feel like you have to do it alone, because some of them are challenging right now. Everyone is spent, and our reactions and the way we're handling things is not always how it should be.
And it looks like
Well, and I think, Kara, it's important that we all three, you, Jen, and myself, between the three of us, we're covering 3/4 of the state. So we are definitely here. This is prime annual review season, and it is a whole different beast that I've never seen in all my career. I'm going to be very honest with you. I've never seen anything like this. And parents are struggling. They're struggling with where they are now, but then where do they go for in the future for their kids? Because they have all regressed, and how do they try to get the services? We really, really are here to help. State Ed is doing the best that it can, which I think is important for people to know they are there, which is CEQA. Okay. But really, reach out to us, attend trainings, let your parents know, because we can do a ton of stuff, but of course we want to make the parents do it and teach them to do it, because that's the important thing. The parents have to learn this. I always like to say, we could go out our front doors in the morning and get hit by a bus. It's really teaching the parents and empowering the parents to learn this stuff, to be able to do it, and teaching you, because we know that you're all, family peer advocates, how to get the parents to do this stuff and learn it. It's not that they're going to learn it overnight, but we're here to help. So, I mean, I think maybe we could send that out again, Jen, for everybody that's on here, all of our information for agencies.
Of course, absolutely. I did want to say that we do have a friend and an ally in Christine in Oneida County. So
I saw that.
reaching out to Christine over there. So thank you, Christine. Yes, we will be sending out the PowerPoint presentation afterwards. There was someone who had asked in relation to some of the slides that were shared that, you'll be able to get some of that information, but we will send out specifically that hand that Kara shared, because it's such a powerful tool. Absolutely.
And then additional tool that will be coming, as Tina shared, this season of meetings is so different. So one of the other tools I'm going to give you is some tips for meeting virtually that I have created for parents to just help them think of, how do these meetings work? Because they are very different. And I think right now it's important to acknowledge, because some families are like, well, I hear the district next door to mine is having meetings in person, and why can't we do that? And what I'm letting them know is every district is approaching this differently, because every district has different guidance that they have to follow. And it's not one is doing it right and one is doing it wrong. It's simply every district is approaching it and doing it from their viewpoint of with the guidance they have. And I'm like, let's take that step back. Now that we've acknowledged how you feel and what's going on, what is it that you feel you need that is missing? And how can we start trying to address that, so that way you can have a successful meeting for you and your child? And sometimes it's prep. Like sometimes, like if the Zoom meeting, people make the assumption, well, we've used Zoom for so long, everybody knows how to use it. Some families don't. They don't know how to turn the video on or mute and unmute or even watch the chat or things like that. And so taking time to help families actually make sure they understand the software that's being used and little things like that can make a huge difference.
Okay. I mean, actually, Jen, I think we've covered a lot of the questions, but everybody, Kara, loved your presentation. Loved it. You did an awesome job. Thank you for helping them. Is what you're getting. And Jen just put in the Survey Monkey into the chat box, so if everybody could definitely fill that out. Just want to make sure, because I don't want to make anybody feel like they're left out. I think that's really important that we make sure of that.
Absolutely.
So I just wanted to piggyback too off something that Kara had said with regards to planning for the fall. That's part 3 of our workshop series, and you're going to get to hear me talk at you in 2 weeks. And so 2 weeks from now on June 8th, we will be presenting on what we can look forward to in the fall. So we're going to cover a lot of information about where we've been, where we're at now, and what we think school is going to look like in the fall, and how you can plan for that, and what resources you can tap into for making that plan for your students in the fall. So we hope that you're going to be able to join us in 2 weeks on June 8th. And I'm going to say, if there's no more questions in the chat, then we're going to be able to let you all go. And Kara, I wanted to thank you again for presenting. It was a fantastic workshop. We really appreciate your time. And Tina, you have been an awesome co-chat monitor, so thank you.
Thank you. And Kara, thank you. Awesome job. Really, thank you.
Thank you.
I learned some new things, because you always learn something new. So I learned some new stuff.
Great. Well, I am so glad, and thank you everyone for your time today. We'll be following up with the slides and those resources that we mentioned. And again, please don't hesitate to reach out if there's anything we can do to help support you. We will get through this together. And I think one of the biggest things is we are showing the importance of open communication and sharing of resources, sharing of knowledge, because we all have space where we can learn something. And I'm looking forward to this afternoon taking time to read over all your comments from the chat. So thank you everyone for those today.
Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful afternoon.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.